Hello, welcome to Complete Stories. In today's video, we'll see everything you need to know to take the A-Levels exam. Enjoy and subscribe to the channel for more videos.
Section 1. How A-Level History is structured. Different exam boards, AQA, Edexcel, OCR, vary slightly, but they all assess three core components. 1. Breadth study. Paper 1. Large period of around 100 years. Example themes: Tudor England, 1485 to 1603, Tsarist and Communist Russia, 1855 to 1964, Germany, 1918 to 1989, the Cold War, the British Empire. This paper tests causation, change and continuity, significance, consequence. 2. Depth study. Paper 2. Focused period, around 40 years, very detailed. Example topics: the French Revolution, the American Civil War, Nazi Germany, Mao's China, the English Revolution. This paper demands deep factual control. Names, policies, dates, factions, motives. 3. Historical investigation, coursework, 20%. 4,000-word essay, independent research. You choose a question like: was Stalin primarily responsible for the Cold War? To what extent was the English Civil War caused by religion? This tests use of historians, interpretations, source evaluation, academic referencing, sustained argument.
Section 2. What examiners actually mark. This is where most students fail. Examiners don't reward storytelling. They reward AO1, knowledge plus argument, clear thesis, analytical explanation, judgment. AO2, source analysis, provenance, context, value, limitations. AO3, historical interpretations, different historians' views, why they disagree, context influencing their interpretation. If you don't evaluate interpretations, you lose top marks.
Section 3. Core themes that always appear. No matter the topic, A-Level history revolves around 5 major analytical themes: power, authority and government, conflict, economic change, and social change. Let's break down the most common topic blocks in detail. Now, let's talk about something absolutely crucial for A-Level history. This is the part that separates the B students from the A and A-star students. I'm talking about the core themes, the patterns that repeat across every historical period you'll study. If you master these themes, you can approach almost any essay, source question, or interpretation with confidence. There are 5 main themes: power, authority, conflict, economic change, and social change. Let's go through them one by one. Power. Power is all about who controls what, who influences people, resources, or events. In A-Level essays, examiners often ask you to evaluate how power was gained, maintained, and lost. For example, think about Tudor England. Henry VII survived because of careful marriage alliances and smart financial management. He didn't just inherit power, he actively strengthened it. Jump to Stalinist Russia. Stalin maintained control through purges, the secret police, and a massive propaganda machine. And in Nazi Germany, Hitler consolidated power after the Reichstag fire and the Enabling Act. The trick here is to analyze not just who had power, but how they used it, whether through force, persuasion, or ideology. Ask yourself, which method of power was most decisive in this case? That's the kind of question examiners love. Authority and government. Authority is formal power, and government is the system that exercises it. Understanding this is key for questions about reform, revolution, or collapse. Look at Weimar Germany. It had a constitution, but proportional representation and Article 48 made its authority weak. Contrast that with Tsarist Russia. Autocracy on paper, but massive inefficiency meant that authority could be challenged. One top trick for A-Level essays is to consider structure versus leadership. Was authority collapsing because of the system itself, or because of the choices of a ruler? Historians debate this constantly. Structuralists would say it's the system. Intentionalists blame the individual. You need to do both. Conflict. Conflict drives change. That's simple, but examiners expect you to go deeper. Conflict comes in many forms: civil wars, revolutions, ideological struggles, international wars. Take the French Revolution. You have centuries of social inequality, but the financial crisis acted as the trigger. Then comes the Reign of Terror, showing the radical consequences of ideology meeting crisis. A good exercise: compare conflicts. Take the English Civil War and the Russian Revolution. Both involved overthrowing a monarchy, but the outcomes were very different. Practicing this kind of comparison is exactly what gets you higher marks. Economic change. Economic often drives political and social events, even if the question doesn't mention it. Look for it. It's often hiding in plain sight. In Tudor England, land enclosure caused social unrest. In Nazi Germany, the Great Depression fueled support for extremist parties. Stalinist Russia's 5-year plans increased industrial output but caused famine. The key is to always link economic change to political and social consequences. Don't just say it happened, explain how it mattered. For example, economic collapse doesn't just create instability, it gives extremist ideologies the opportunity to flourish. Social change. Finally, social change. This is about how society and people's roles evolve over time. Class, gender, religion, and education all count. In Tudor England, the rise of the gentry and the decline of feudal aristocracy changed the social hierarchy. In industrial Britain, urbanization and child labor reshaped communities. In Maoist China, land redistribution and gender policies transformed everyday life. When writing about social change, always ask who benefited, who lost, was this a cause of political change or a result of it? That analytical approach is what gets top marks. Summary/closing of Section 3. So, if you remember nothing else from this section, remember this: history is not just a list of events. Look for these themes: power, authority, conflict, economic, and social change. Ask yourself these questions for every topic. Who held power and how? How did authority function, and did it succeed or fail? What conflicts drove change? How did the economy shape politics and society? How did social structures shift, and who was affected? If you can answer these 5 questions for any period, you're already thinking like a historian. That's exactly what A-level examiners want.
Section 4. Tudor England, from 1485 to 1603. This is one of the most popular topics. Key questions. How secure was Henry VII's rule? Was Henry VIII's Reformation political or religious? How powerful was Elizabeth I? Henry VII, 1485 to 1609. Claim to throne was weak. He won at Bosworth. Threats: Lambert Simnel, Perkin Warbeck, Yorkist rebellions. Key argument theme: he survived not through popularity, but through financial control and strategic marriages. Henry VIII and the Reformation. Major exam debate: was the break with Rome about love or power? Argument 1, it was about Anne Boleyn. Argument 2, it was about sovereignty and money. Strong essays argue personal motives triggered it, political ambition sustained it. Elizabeth I. Core debates: religious settlement, compromise or failure? Why did the Spanish Armada fail? Was her government stable? Top-level analysis includes factionalism at court, foreign policy limitations, economic pressure. In the next section, we move from Tudor politics to revolution, ideology and dictatorship. Russia, France, Germany, the 20th century, and the question that dominates modern A-level history: why do societies collapse? Now we move on to one of the most famous periods in British history, Tudor England, from 1485 to 1603. This is a period full of drama: wars, religious upheaval, political intrigue, and social change. If you're taking A-level history, this era is a goldmine for essays, source questions, and interpretations. Let's break it down step by step. 1. The establishment of the Tudor dynasty, from 1485 to 1609. Henry VII came to power in 1485 after the Battle of Bosworth Field, defeating Richard III and ending the Wars of the Roses. But his position wasn't secure. He faced potential Yorkist claimants and rebellions. So how did he maintain power? 2 key strategies: marriage alliances and financial control. By marrying Elizabeth of York, he united the 2 warring houses, creating legitimacy for his reign. Economically, he was cautious. He avoided expensive wars and strengthened the crown's finances through effective taxation and feudal dues. Historians often argue that Henry VII's long-term impact was stability over glory. Without him, the Tudor dynasty might never have survived. 2. Henry VIII and the Break with Rome, from 1409 to 1547. Henry VIII is probably the most famous Tudor. Why? Because his reign changed England forever. The story everyone knows is about his 6 wives, but there's much more: the Reformation and the creation of the Church of England. Henry needed a male heir, but Pope Clement VII refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. So Henry did something revolutionary. He broke with Rome, establishing the monarch as head of the Church of England. This was not just a religious decision, it was political and financial. By controlling the church, Henry gained access to its wealth and lands, which strengthened his authority and allowed him to reward loyal supporters. Historians debate Henry's motives. Some argue it was purely personal desire for a son. Others say it was calculated power politics. Most agree it was a combination, both personal and political. 3. Religious upheaval and the Reformation. Religion under the Tudors was never stable. England went from Catholicism under Henry VII to the Protestant leanings under Edward VI, back to Catholicism under Mary I, and finally to the Elizabethan religious settlement. This wasn't just spiritual. Religion affected every part of society: laws, education, taxation, and even loyalty to the crown. Let's take Mary I. She tried to restore Catholicism, burning Protestants at the stake. This led to fear and resentment, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. By contrast, Elizabeth I introduced a compromise, the Elizabethan religious settlement of 1559, which allowed some Catholic practices but firmly established Protestantism. This shows a key A-level theme: power and religion are deeply intertwined. Religion could legitimize authority, but it could also threaten it. 4. Economy and society. The Tudors presided over a period of significant economic change. Population growth put pressure on food and land. Enclosure, turning common land into private farmland, caused social unrest and migration to towns. The rise of the gentry class created new social dynamics. Nobles were no longer the only source of influence. Wealthy commoners could gain political influence through service to the crown. Poverty and vagrancy became issues. The government tried to address this with the Poor Laws, which were early attempts of social policy. For historians, these changes are crucial. Some argue they laid the foundation for modern England, shifting from a feudal society to a more centralized bureaucratic state. 5. Key crises and challenges. The Tudors constantly faced crises. Let's look at a few. Succession crises. Henry VIII's lack of male heirs created political instability. Rebellions. The Pilgrimage of Grace in 1536, for example, was a massive northern uprising against religious reform. Foreign threats. England was always wary of France, Spain, and Scotland. Mary I's marriage to Philip II brought tension, and Elizabeth had to navigate potential invasions. These challenges show another A-level theme: how rulers manage power under pressure. Survival often depended on balancing diplomacy, force, and public perception. 6. Elizabeth I, the Golden Age. Elizabeth I's reign is often called the Golden Age. Why? Because of stability, culture, and consolidation of power. She faced pressure from Catholics, the Spanish Armada, and domestic plots, but she maintained authority through clever use of propaganda, patronage, and compromise. Elizabeth also encouraged exploration and trade. Figures like Sir Francis Drake expanded England's influence, which strengthened the crown economically and politically. Historians often debate whether Elizabeth was truly successful because of her personal genius or because she inherited a more stable system from her predecessors. The truth is likely a combination, but for A-level essays, the key is to analyze her methods, not just celebrate her achievements. 7. Historiographical notes. When writing essays, remember the historians. For example, Elton argued that the Tudors created a modern state, emphasizing bureaucratic efficiency. McCulloch focuses on religion as the driver of change, particularly Henry VIII's Reformation. Loads highlights personal agency, showing how Elizabeth's decisions shaped the course of English history. A-level examiners want you to use these interpretations to support or challenge your argument, not just quote them. 8. Conclusion of Section 4. So what's the takeaway from Tudor England? This era is a perfect study of power, religion, economic change, social change, and crisis management. Every king and queen faced challenges, and the way they responded shaped the future of England. When writing essays, always connect events to themes and analyze cause, consequence, and interpretation. Ask yourself, why did this matter? Who benefited? Who lost? And importantly, how did historians interpret this? Master Tudor England, and you've got a strong foundation for almost any A-level history question.
Section 5, the French Revolution, 1789 to 1799. If A-level history has a turning point, it is 1789. The French Revolution is one of the most examined topics because it contains everything: economic crisis, political failure, social inequality, ideological transformation, terror, war. Why did the revolution happen? Examiners love causation debates. Strong essays divide causes into categories.
1. Long-term causes: absolutist monarchy, inequality of the three estates, tax burden on the third estate, Enlightenment ideas, Rousseau, Voltaire. 2. Medium-term causes: financial crisis after American War of Independence, failure of reform ministers, Necker, Cologne. 3. Short-term trigger: Estates General, 1789, tennis court oath, storming of the Bastille. Top-grade argument: the revolution was not inevitable, it was triggered by financial collapse and political mismanagement. The Reign of Terror, 1793 to 1794. Big exam question: was Robespierre defending the revolution or destroying it? Students must evaluate. Committee of Public Safety, Law of Suspects, Revolutionary Tribunals, Execution Numbers. Top-level judgment: terror was both ideological and pragmatic. War and internal rebellion radicalized the revolution. Why did Napoleon rise? Examiners expect analysis of weak directory government, military success, popular desire for stability. Key argument: Napoleon did not end the revolution, he consolidated it. Now, we move across the Channel to one of the most dramatic periods in European history, the French Revolution and 19th century Europe from 1789 to 1871. This period is a goldmine for A-level history: revolutions, empires, wars, and social transformation. It's messy, it's violent, and it's fascinating, and understanding it will teach you how ideas, power, and society collide in history. 1. Causes of the French Revolution. Let's start at the beginning. Why did the French Revolution happen? There are long-term and short-term causes. Economic crisis. France was nearly bankrupt. The monarchy spent lavishly while peasants starved. Bad harvests in 1788 led to soaring bread prices. Social inequality. The estate system divided society into three groups: clergy, nobility, and the commoners, the third estate, who bore the taxes but had no real power. Political crisis. Louis XVI was indecisive. Parliaments resisted reform. When the Estates General met in 1789, tensions exploded. Enlightenment ideas. Philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau inspired people to question monarchy, privilege, and inequality. Historians debate which cause mattered most. Some, like Lefebvre, focus on social and economic pressures, while others, like Soboul, highlight the role of revolutionary ideas. For A-level essays, the trick is to combine these. Revolutions rarely have a single cause. 2. Key events of the revolution. Once the revolution began, events escalated quickly. Storming of the Bastille, July 14, 1789, a symbol of popular revolt and the start of widespread revolutionary action. The National Assembly and the Declaration of the Rights of Man. These documents codified liberty, equality, and fraternity, shaping revolutionary ideology. The Radical Phase, 1792 to 1794, led by the Jacobins, with Robespierre at the forefront. The Reign of Terror saw thousands executed, including King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Notice a pattern here. Conflict, ideology, and power struggles are all intertwined. Revolution was not only political, it was social, economic, and cultural. 3. The rise of Napoleon. Out of the chaos emerged Napoleon Bonaparte, a master of both military and political power. He consolidated power with the consulate in 1799 and crowned himself emperor in 1804. Napoleon reformed the French state, creating the Napoleon Code, centralizing administration and modernizing education. Abroad, he conquered much of Europe, spreading revolutionary ideals, but also imposing authoritarian rule. This is a classic example for A-level essays. Reform and dictatorship can coexist. Napoleon maintained stability and order, but at the cost of individual liberty. 4. The Congress of Vienna and the Restoration, 1815. After Napoleon's defeat in 1815, Europe's leaders wanted stability and order. The Congress of Vienna redrew the map of Europe, restoring monarchies and creating a balance of power to prevent future continental wars. But here's the catch. While Europe was stable on paper, revolutionary ideas didn't disappear. Nationalism and liberalism simmered under the surface, ready to erupt in the 19th century. For A-level exams, you can link this to a key theme. Did reactionary policies prevent change or just delay it? 5. Revolutions of 1848. Fast forward to 1848. Europe exploded again with revolutions from France to the German states to Italy. Economic hardship, political repression, and demands for national unity drove these revolts. France overthrew Louis Philippe, leading to the Second Republic. In the German states and Italy, reformers demanded unification and constitutional governments, though most were crushed. This demonstrates a key A-level theme. Revolution is cyclical. Ideas spread, people resist, and change can be slow, violent, and uneven.
6. Unification of Germany and Italy. By the 60s and 70s of the 19th century, revolutionary energy produced new nation-states. Italy, Count Cavour and Giuseppe Garibaldi combined diplomacy and military strategy to unify Italy under the monarchy of Victor Emmanuel II. Germany, Otto von Bismarck used blood and iron, wars with Denmark, Austria and France to unify the German states under Prussian leadership. Notice the patterns here: power, nationalism and military strategy. These are exactly the A-level themes we discussed before. 7. Social and economic change in 19th century Europe. Europe was also changing socially and economically. Industrialization transformed cities, creating new social classes and urban poverty. Workers began organizing into unions and movements, challenging traditional elites. Technological progress from railways to telegraphs accelerated economic growth and connected nations. For historians, this shows the interplay between social and economic change. You can argue in essays that revolutions were often fueled not just by politics or ideology, but by real economic pressures and societal transformations. 8. Historiographical insights. When writing A-level essays, remember to include historians' interpretations. Lefebvre emphasized social causes of the French Revolution. Tilly focused on political opportunity structures and state building. Breuerle and modern historians analyzed nationalism and the role of elites in 19th century unifications. Using these interpretations shows examiners that you can engage critically with historical debates, not just narrate events. 9. Conclusion of Section 5. So, what's the takeaway from the French Revolution and 19th century Europe? Revolutions and wars are rarely caused by a single factor. Power, ideology, social pressures, and economic conditions are always intertwined. Change is messy, often violent, and rarely immediate. And finally, history is about interpretation, understanding why events happened, how people reacted, and how historians debate these questions. Master this period, and you can write strong essays on revolution, nationalism, and the development of modern Europe.
Section 6. Russia, 1855 to 1964. Russia is one of the most popular A-level topics. It covers Tsarism, revolution, Stalinism, Cold War leadership. Why did the Tsar fall in 1917? Essay structure should include long-term, autocracy, weak industrialization, political repression. Short-term, World War I failures, food shortages, February Revolution. Top students argue war exposed structural weakness, it did not create it. Lenin versus Stalin. Classic interpretation debate. Was Stalin a true Leninist or did he betray the revolution? Students must compare war communism, NEP, 5-year plans, collectivization, purges. Top-level answer: Stalin adapted Leninist foundations but expanded authoritarianism to unprecedented levels. How did Stalin maintain control? Examiners look for terror, NKVD, gulags, propaganda, cult of personality, economic control, fear and ideology. High-level insight: Stalin's power rested not just on fear, but on control of party structure. Now we turn our eyes east to a country that experienced perhaps some of the most dramatic transformations in modern history, Russia from 1894 to 1945. This period covers the fall of the Romanovs, the rise of Bolshevism, Lenin, Stalin, and the Second World War. If you want to understand revolutions, dictatorship, and social change, this is your section. 1. Nicholas II and the fall of the Romanovs, 1894 to 1917. Russia in 1894 was a massive empire ruled by Tsar Nicholas II. Politically, it was autocratic. The Tsar held absolute power, and the Duma, the new parliament, had limited influence. But society was changing. Industrialization had created new urban workers, while peasants faced land shortages. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905 was a disaster, humiliating Russia and sparking unrest. Then came the 1905 revolution, triggered by Bloody Sunday, peaceful protesters shot by the Tsar's troops. Nicholas II was forced to make concessions, creating the Duma and promising reforms, but these were half measures, leaving anger simmering. 2. The 1917 revolutions. Fast forward to World War I. Russia's army was losing, food shortages grew, and morale collapsed. February Revolution. Workers and soldiers revolted in Petrograd. Nicholas II abdicated. The provisional government took over but struggled to maintain authority. October Revolution. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, seized power. Their slogans, peace, land and bread, appealed to workers, soldiers and peasants. The Russian Revolution is a perfect A-level case study for themes of power, social change and ideology. It wasn't just a coup, it was a complete transformation of society, economy and government.
3. Lenin and the creation of the Soviet state. Lenin ruled Russia from 1917 until his death in 1924. His policies included war communism, nationalization of industry and forced requisition of food. New economic policy, NEP, a partial retreat allowing small private businesses to recover the economy. Lenin's leadership shows a key A-level theme, how ideology and pragmatism can coexist. He aimed to create a socialist state, but adapted policies to survive crises. 4. Stalin and totalitarian rule, 1924 to 1941. After Lenin's death, Stalin consolidated power through political cunning, purges and propaganda. He transformed the USSR into a totalitarian state. Industrialization, the 5-year plans rapidly modernized industry but at enormous human cost. Collectivization, private farms were seized to form state-run collectives. Millions of peasants died in famines, especially in Ukraine. The Great Purge, political opponents, military leaders and perceived enemies were executed or sent to gulags. Stalin demonstrates another A-level theme, power maintained through fear, ideology and control of information. But historians debate whether his rule was necessary for modernization or an unprecedented human tragedy. 5. The USSR and World War II. World War II put the USSR to the ultimate test. The Nazi invasion in 1941 pushed the country to the brink. The Soviet population endured mass casualties, but the Red Army eventually pushed back, capturing Berlin in 1945. Here we see the interplay of power, ideology, and national survival. Stalin's dictatorship prepared the USSR for war, but at an enormous human cost. This is central to understanding historical consequences. 6. Social and economic change under Lenin and Stalin. During this period, Russian society was transformed. Urbanization, millions moved to cities for industrial work. Education, literacy campaigns under Lenin and Stalin increased literacy and technical skills. Class, the old aristocracy was eliminated, the peasantry was collectivized, and a new elite emerged, the party bureaucracy. A-level essays often ask who benefited from these changes, or were they worth the human cost? Always link social and economic transformations to political outcomes. 7. Historiography. When writing essays, remember the key debates. Totalitarian model, Stalin's USSR was highly centralized, with control over every aspect of life. Revisionist historians emphasize the role of society, bureaucracy, and local officials in shaping policy. Lenin versus Stalin debate, was Stalin's terror a continuation of Leninist ideas or an entirely new system? Using these debates demonstrates critical engagement, which is exactly what A-level examiners look for. 8. Conclusion of Section 6. So what do we take away from Russia 1894 to 1945? Revolutions can completely change political, social, and economic structures. Totalitarian regimes can modernize a country, but often at a terrible human cost. Power, ideology, social change, and economic pressures are deeply intertwined. Mastering this period will not only help with essays on Russia, but also give you tools to analyze dictatorship, revolution, and the human impact of historical change.
Section 7. Nazi Germany, 1918 to 1945. This topic is heavy on economic collapse, political instability, ideology, totalitarian control. Why did Hitler come to power? Strong structure. 1. Weakness of Weimar Constitution. Article 48. Proportional representation. 2. Economic crisis. Hyperinflation 1923. Great Depression 1929. 3. Nazi appeal. Propaganda. Anti-communism. Charismatic leadership. Top answer. The Depression was decisive, but only because democracy was already fragile. How did Hitler establish a dictatorship? Students must reference Reichstag fire, Enabling Act, Night of the Long Knives, Gestapo, SS. Examiners want evaluation. Was Nazi Germany a totalitarian state, or did competing power structures exist? Now, we turn to one of the most studied and dramatic periods in modern European history, Nazi Germany, from 1919 to 1945. This era includes the collapse of the Weimar Republic, the rise of Adolf Hitler, the creation of a totalitarian state, and the horrors of World War II. Understanding this period is essential for A-level history because it illustrates power, ideology, social manipulation, and the consequences of dictatorship. 1. The Weimar Republic, 1919 to 1933. After Germany's defeat in World War I, the Kaiser was abdicated and the Weimar Republic was established. Politically, it was a democracy, but it faced enormous challenges: hyperinflation in 1923, political extremism from both left and right, and resentment from the Treaty of Versailles. Socially, Germans were frustrated by economic hardship and a sense of national humiliation. Historians argue that the weaknesses of Weimar made Nazi rise possible. Some, like Kershaw, emphasize structural weaknesses and popular discontent, while others stress Hitler's personal charisma and propaganda. Both are important for A-level essays. 2. Hitler and the rise of the Nazi Party. Adolf Hitler joined the German Workers' Party in 1919, which became the Nazi Party. Several factors contributed to his rise. Economic crises. The Great Depression hit Germany hard, creating massive unemployment. Fear of communism. Middle classes and elites supported Hitler as a bulwark against leftist revolution. Propaganda and mass rallies. Joseph Goebbels' propaganda created a cult of personality around Hitler. By 1933, Hitler became Chancellor. The Reichstag fire and the Enabling Act allowed him to consolidate power legally, turning Germany into a dictatorship. 3. The Nazi totalitarian state. Once in power, Hitler transformed Germany. Political control. Opposition parties were banned, trade unions dissolved, and the Gestapo terrorized dissenters. Economic policy. Unemployment was reduced through public works like the Autobahn, rearmament and militarization. Propaganda and ideology. Nazis controlled media, education and culture, promoting Aryan supremacy and anti-Semitism. This is a classic A-level example of how power, ideology and social manipulation intersect. 4. Society under Nazi rule. The Nazis targeted different social groups differently. Youth, Hitler Youth and League of German Girls indoctrinated children with Nazi ideology. Women, the regime promoted motherhood and the family as central to the state, restricting women's professional opportunities. Jews, Roma and other minorities. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 institutionalized racial discrimination, culminating in the Holocaust. Historians debate the level of popular support versus coercion. Was Nazi Germany a fully totalitarian state, where people obeyed out of fear, or did many Germans actively support the regime? Most agree it was a combination. 5. Opposition and resistance. Despite Nazi control, opposition existed. Political groups like communists and socialists resisted, though often crushed. Religious figures such as Dietrich Bonhoeffer opposed the regime. Ordinary citizens sometimes resisted quietly, hiding Jews, listening to banned radio, or engaging in sabotage. For A-level essays, it's important to show nuance. The regime was powerful, but not absolute. 6. Nazi Germany and World War II, 1939 to 1945. Hitler's aggressive foreign policy led to World War II. Key points. Early victories. Blitzkrieg tactics allowed Germany to conquer Poland, France, and much of Western Europe. Turning points. Stalingrad and D-Day marked the decline of German power. Atrocities. The Holocaust resulted in the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, along with millions of others considered undesirable by the Nazis. Here we see A-level themes clearly: power, ideology, conflict, and the human cost of political ambition. 7. Historiography. Understanding interpretations is vital for top marks. Intentionalist historians argue Hitler had a master plan from the beginning, particularly regarding the Holocaust. Structuralist historians emphasize the chaotic nature of the Nazi state, suggesting policies evolved through bureaucratic competition and circumstance. Combined approaches argue for a mix of Hitler's personal vision and structural factors. Using these debates in essays shows critical engagement and sophistication. 8. Conclusion of Section 7. So, what can we take away from Nazi Germany? Totalitarian regimes can consolidate power quickly through ideology, terror, and propaganda. Economic hardship and social unrest can fuel extremism. Ideology can be used to justify both social control and mass violence. Resistance existed, but survival often depended on fear, conformity, and opportunity. Mastering this period gives you strong analytical tools for A-level essays on dictatorship, ideology, conflict, and the consequences of unchecked power.
Section 8. The Cold War, 1945 to 1991. One of the most analytical topics. Focus areas: ideological tension, superpower rivalry, proxy wars, nuclear deterrence. Who caused the Cold War? 3 interpretations students must know. Orthodox, blames Stalin. Revisionist, blames USA economic expansion. Post-revisionist, shared responsibility. High-level essays evaluate context. Early Cold War tensions were mutual distrust, rooted in wartime suspicion. Why did the Cold War end? Key factors: Gorbachev's reforms, glasnost, perestroika, economic stagnation in USSR, Reagan's pressure, Eastern European unrest. Strong conclusion: internal Soviet weakness mattered more than American pressure. Now we shift to the global stage with one of the most ideologically charged periods of the 20th century, the Cold War,
from 1945 to 1991. Unlike previous conflicts, this war wasn't fought with armies on a battlefield, at least not directly. It was fought through ideology, politics, espionage, and proxy wars, and understanding it is crucial for A-level history. 1. Origins of the Cold War. Let's start with why the Cold War happened. There were long-term and short-term causes. Ideological differences. The USA was capitalist and democratic, while the USSR was communist and authoritarian. Mutual distrust. Stalin feared the West would attempt another invasion. The USA feared Soviet expansion. The end of World War II. The alliance between Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin was temporary. Once Germany was defeated, tensions surfaced over the future of Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe. Historians debate the origins. Orthodox interpretations blame Stalin, revisionists blame the USA, and post-revisionists see a complex mix of ideology, fear, and miscommunication. For A-level essays, it's key to discuss these differing views. 2. Early Cold War crises, 1945 to 1955. The first decade of the Cold War was tense and fragile. Iron Curtain and Eastern Europe. The USSR established communist regimes in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and East Germany. Truman Doctrine, 1947. Marshall Plan. The USA pledged to contain communism and rebuild Western Europe. Berlin Blockade, 1948-1949. Stalin tried to force the West out of Berlin, but the Berlin airlift kept the city supplied. These events show the central A-level theme, superpower rivalry and the balance between ideology and power. 3. Cold War escalation, 1955 to 1979. During this period, tensions escalated and spread globally. Arms race and space race. Both superpowers built nuclear arsenals and competed in space exploration, symbolizing technological and ideological superiority. Proxy wars, Korea 1950-1953, Vietnam 1955-1975, Afghanistan 1979 became battlefields for indirect conflict. Cuban Missile Crisis 1962, the closest the world came to nuclear war, showing how brinkmanship defined Cold War politics. Historians often argue that mutual deterrence prevented direct conflict, while also highlighting the human cost of proxy wars. 4. Détente and the 1970s. In the 1970s, both superpowers sought reducing tensions. SALT I and II treaties limited nuclear weapons. The Helsinki Accords 1975 promoted human rights and cooperation. Détente shows another A-level theme, the cyclical nature of international relations, periods of tension followed by negotiation. 5. The end of the Cold War, 1980-1991. The final phase saw dramatic change. Gorbachev's reforms, glasnost and perestroika. Economic restructuring weakened Soviet control. Fall of the Berlin Wall, 1989, symbolizing the collapse of Soviet influence in Eastern Europe. Dissolution of the USSR, 1991, marked the official end of the Cold War. Historians debate why the Cold War ended. Some emphasize Soviet economic weakness, others highlight Western pressure and leadership, while some focus on internal political change. For essays, it's important to balance these interpretations. 6. Social, economic, and cultural impacts. Even though the Cold War was political and military, it affected societies everywhere. Arms expenditure, militarization shaped economies and politics. Propaganda and culture, movies, literature, and education became ideological tools. Fear and conformity, nuclear anxiety and McCarthyism in the USA, state control in the USSR. This demonstrates the A-level theme that history is shaped not only by leaders and events, but also by societal reactions and pressures. 7. Historiography. Remember to include historians in essays. John Lewis Gaddis, Orthodox view, blames Soviet expansion. William Appleman Williams, revisionist, blames USA for economic imperialism. Post-revisionists focus on misunderstanding, mutual fear, and misperceptions. This lets you analyze causation, responsibility, and interpretation, which is exactly what examiners look for. 8. Conclusion of Section 8. So what's the key takeaway from the Cold War? It was a global conflict fought through ideology, politics, and proxy wars, rather than conventional battles. Fear, power, and competition shaped almost every decision. Societies were transformed, economies redirected, and culture used as a weapon. Understanding multiple interpretations is essential for high-level A-level essays. Mastering this period gives you a strong foundation for analyzing the 20th century's global conflicts, ideology, and the interplay of domestic and international pressures.
Section 9. How to structure a 25 to 30 mark essay. Most students know the content, few know how to argue. At A-level, structure is everything. If your argument is unclear, you cap yourself at a B. Let's break down the perfect structure. The golden formula. Your introduction must directly answer the question, define key terms, establish criteria for judgment, show line of argument. Example question. To what extent was economic crisis the main cause of the French Revolution? Weak intro. There were many causes of the French Revolution. Strong intro. Although long-term social inequality created structural tension in pre-revolutionary France, it was the immediate financial collapse of the monarchy that transformed dissatisfaction into political revolution. Therefore, economic crisis was the decisive trigger, but not the sole underlying cause. Clear, analytical, judgment present. 1. Analytical paragraph structure, peace model. Point, evidence, analysis, counter-argument, evaluation. Example. Point. Economic crisis forced Louis XVI to call the Estates General. Evidence. Bankruptcy after American War and failed tax reforms. Analysis. This exposed the monarchy's weakness and legitimized political opposition. Counter. However, inequality had existed for centuries. Evaluation. Yet without financial collapse, reform could have been gradual rather than revolutionary. This is level 5 writing. 3. Conclusion. Do not repeat. Synthesize, rank factors, show relative importance. Examiners love phrases like ultimately, decisively, more significant than, short-term trigger versus long-term pressure. Now we move to one of the most analytical topics in modern history, the Cold War, 1945 to 1991. Unlike previous wars, this conflict wasn't always fought with armies on the battlefield. Instead, it was a war of ideology, influence, and global rivalry, shaping the politics, societies, and economies of almost every corner of the world. 1. Ideological tension. The Cold War was fundamentally about ideology. On one side, you had the United States, capitalist, democratic, and committed to individual freedoms. On the other, the Soviet Union, communist, authoritarian, and aiming to spread socialism. These differences weren't just abstract, they shaped every decision, from foreign policy to domestic propaganda. The ideological divide created fear, mistrust, and the sense that compromise was almost impossible. 2. Superpower rivalry. The USA and USSR were the superpowers, and their rivalry defined global politics for nearly 5 decades. Both competed for influence in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The United Nations, NATO, and the Warsaw Pact became arenas of competition. Both invested heavily in military capability, especially nuclear weapons. For A-level students, this demonstrates how power and ideology drive international relations. 3. Proxy wars. Instead of fighting directly, the superpowers often engaged in proxy wars. Korea 1950 to 1953, North Korea backed by China and the USSR, South Korea backed by the USA. Vietnam 1955 to 1975, North Vietnam supported by the USSR and China, South Vietnam by the USA. Afghanistan 1979 to 1989, Soviet invasion countered by US-backed Mujahideen. These conflicts show how the Cold War was global, with devastating consequences for local populations. This is a critical point for essay examples. 4. Nuclear deterrence. Another key feature was nuclear deterrence. Both superpowers built massive arsenals capable of mutual destruction. The threat of mutually assured destruction, MAD, meant direct conflict was avoided. Events like the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, brought the world perilously close to nuclear war. For A-level essays, you can link nuclear weapons to the theme of fear, power, and diplomacy. 5. Who caused the Cold War? Historians debate the causes, and students must understand 3 main interpretations. Orthodox blames Stalin's aggressive expansion and ideology. Revisionist blames the USA's economic expansion and desire to dominate global trade. Post-revisionist sees responsibility as shared, emphasizing mutual suspicion and historical context. High-level essays should evaluate context. Early Cold War tensions were rooted in wartime distrust, not just ideology. Both superpowers acted defensively while trying to secure their post-war goals. 6. Why did the Cold War end? By the late 1980s, the Cold War came to a dramatic close. Several factors contributed. Gorbachev's reforms. Glasnost promoted openness, while Perestroika restructured the economy. Economic stagnation in the USSR. The Soviet economy couldn't keep pace with the West. Reagan's pressure. US defense spending and ideological stance challenged the USSR. Eastern European unrest. Popular revolts and pro-democracy movements weakened Soviet control. While all these factors mattered, the strongest argument is that internal Soviet weakness, economic and political, was more decisive than external American pressure. 7. Strong conclusion. So, what can we take away? The Cold War was about ideology, power, and global influence. It was fought indirectly through proxy wars, diplomacy, and nuclear tension. Historiographical debate is essential. Understanding orthodox, revisionist, and post-revisionist perspectives strengthens essays. And when it ended, it was internal weakness within the USSR, more than American action, that sealed the fate of the Cold War. Mastering these points will not only help you answer causation and consequence questions, but also make your essays insightful and analytical, exactly what examiners want.
Section 10. Source questions. A02 mastery. Source questions separate A students from A-star students. Examiners assess content, provenance, context, purpose, value, limitation. The provenance formula: who wrote it, when, why, audience, political position. Example: a speech by Stalin in 1936 praising industrial growth. High-level analysis. Valuable because it reflects official state narrative and propaganda aims during the second five-year plan. Limited because it exaggerates success and ignores human cost. Always link provenance to argument, never just describe it. Welcome to the final section of our A-Level History Masterclass. You've now learned content, essay structure, and historiographical debate. But knowing history isn't enough. You need to revise strategically to score top marks. Today we'll cover revision techniques, exam strategies, and how to retain knowledge under pressure. 1. Active revision over passive reading. First, stop passively reading textbooks. That's a common trap. Instead, summarize and recite. After reading a topic, close the book and explain it in your own words. Pretend you're teaching someone. Flashcards. Use them for dates, key terms, and historians' interpretations. Mind maps. Connect events, causes, and consequences visually. This is particularly useful for complex topics like the Cold War or Tudor England. Active recall strengthens memory far more than just rereading. 2. Timed practice essays. A-level history is about analysis and timing. You need to practice. Write full essays under exam conditions, 25 to 30 mark questions in 40 to 50 minutes. Plan first. Spend 5 to 10 minutes outlining piece paragraphs and key historiographical debates. Evaluate sources. For source-based questions, always link evidence to interpretation. Remember, clarity and argument matter more than writing everything you know. Examiners want structured, analytical answers. 3. Use historiographical strategically. Historiography can elevate your essay from a B to an A-star. Always mention different interpretations where relevant. Link historians' opinions to your argument, e.g., according to Gaddis, Stalin's expansionism caused the Cold War, but post-revisionists argue it was mutual distrust. Don't overuse names, use them to support your analysis, not replace it. This shows critical thinking and engagement with historical debate. 4. Focus on causation, consequence, and significance. Exams love these three analytical angles. Causation: why did events happen? What factors were most important? Consequence: what changed, for whom, and how? Significance: why does this matter in the bigger picture of history? Use these angles in both essays and source analysis. They form the backbone of Level 5 writing. 5. Group work and discussion. History is easier to remember when you discuss it. Debate causes and consequences with classmates. Explain complex topics like Nazi Germany or the Cold War to someone else. Discuss historiographical interpretations. Who's right, who's partially right, and why? Explaining to others forces you to clarify your own understanding. 6. Past papers and examiner reports. Nothing beats practice with real exam questions. Use past papers to identify common question types. Time yourself to simulate real exam conditions. Study examiner reports to see what they reward. Clear argument, analysis, evaluation, and contextual understanding. Always review your answers critically. What did you miss? Where could your judgment be stronger? 7. Stress management and exam technique. Finally, history exams test your brain and stamina. Plan short breaks during revision to stay fresh. Sleep well. Memory consolidates during rest. In the exam, read questions carefully. Identify command words. Evaluate, assess, analyze, compare. Annotate sources. Highlight dates, names, and key phrases before you start writing. Confidence and clarity in the exam can make a big difference. 8. Final advice. To master A-level history, know your content deeply. Events, dates, causes, consequences, historiography. Write structured essays consistently. Introduction, piece paragraphs, conclusion. Revise actively and strategically. Practice, discuss, evaluate. Think like a historian. Analyze, compare interpretations, and make reasoned judgments. Follow this approach and you're not just memorizing history, you're thinking historically, which is exactly what top A-level examiners want to see.